Los Angeles. To the world, it's a city of sunshine, palm trees, and Hollywood dreams. But in the sprawling suburbs beyond the glitter of Sunset Boulevard, another story unfolds. One written not in fame or fortune, but in blood. Here, in neighborhoods like Glendale, Sherman Oaks, and Encino, the American dream wears a darker mask. Mansions double as safe houses. Strip malls conceal underground casinos. Luxury cars become rolling fortresses for men who carry silencers in their glove compartments. And lurking in these suburbs is a quiet, violent war between two of the most dangerous criminal brotherhoods ever to set foot on American soil: the Aryan Brotherhood and the Russian Mafia. One, born in the chaos of California's most violent prisons, thrives on racial loyalty, intimidation, and an ironclad code of silence. The other, hardened in the gulags of the Soviet Union, rose from the ashes of the Cold War to build an empire of fraud, smuggling, and international reach. To understand why the Aryan Brotherhood began killing Russian mobsters in the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles, we have to go back to the beginning, back to the origins of both groups, their rise to power, and the invisible fault line that would one day erupt in bloodshed. It's a story of greed, a story of survival. But more than anything, it's a story about territory, both inside prison walls and outside on the streets. For the Aryan Brotherhood, the suburbs of Los Angeles are more than real estate. They're part of a criminal ecosystem, one that feeds their methamphetamine networks and keeps their control over white inmates alive. For the Russians, those same suburbs represent freedom and power, a chance to rebuild their empire far from Moscow's shadows. But in the criminal underworld, there's no such thing as sharing. When predators hunt the same prey, one of them must bleed. The first signs of this conflict were subtle. Russians opening nightclubs where Aryan Brotherhood associates already pushed drugs. Russians muscling into car theft and chop shop operations in the San Fernando Valley. At first, it was tense but manageable, a Cold War fought through whispers and threats. Then came the prisons. As Russian mobsters began serving time in California lockups, the Aryan Brotherhood faced something they were not used to: resistance. White inmates traditionally bowed to the Brotherhood's control, but Russians brought with them a code older and just as ruthless: vori v zakone, thieves-in-law, criminals who answered to no one. Inside, defiance is more dangerous than violence, and the Brotherhood would not tolerate it. On the outside, the killings began. Russian associates found dead in expensive cars. Home invasion robberies that left mobsters beaten or executed in front of their families. Each murder whispered the same message: the Aryan Brotherhood does not share power. What looked like random suburban crimes were, in truth, the opening shots of an underground war. A war most Angelenos never even knew existed. And so the question remains: why? Why did the Aryan Brotherhood feel compelled to kill Russian mob members in the very suburbs that symbolize peace and prosperity to the rest of the city? The answer begins not in a mansion or nightclub, but in a prison cell, in the story of how a gang of white inmates in the 1960s became one of America's deadliest criminal empires. To understand why the Aryan Brotherhood would one day clash with Russian mobsters in the Los Angeles suburbs, you first need to understand what the Brotherhood is and what it stands for. The year is 1964. California's San Quentin State Prison is a pressure cooker of violence. African-American inmates are organizing under the Black Guerrilla family. Latino inmates are rallying around La M, the Mexican Mafia. White inmates, once dominant, find themselves outnumbered, outgunned, and vulnerable. From this desperation, the Aryan Brotherhood is born. At first, it is a simple pact, a mutual protection society for white convicts, but survival quickly hardens into something darker. The Brotherhood adopts white supremacist ideology, drawing inspiration from Nazi symbols, tattoos, and rhetoric. swastikas inked on flesh, shamrock clovers carved into skin, lightning bolts burned into muscle. Their creed is loyalty and violence. Members swear blood oaths. Defection is punishable by death. And behind the racial slogans lies something even stronger: profit. Within a decade, the Brotherhood evolves into a prison empire. Drugs become their currency. Methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine flow through prison yards, sold and distributed by Brotherhood associates. Gambling debts are collected with shanks. Protection rackets keep weaker inmates in line. And when words fail, blades do the talking. By the 1970s, law enforcement realizes the Brotherhood is not just another prison gang. It's an organized crime syndicate. Even behind bars, they operate like a military machine. Orders flow down from shot callers in solitary confinement. Prospects on the outside commit robberies, drug deals, and even contract killings to prove their worth. Every killing serves a purpose: to enforce loyalty, to protect revenue streams, or to send a message. The Aryan Brotherhood quickly becomes infamous for its ruthlessness. They are believed to be responsible for a disproportionate share of murders inside California prisons, sometimes as high as a quarter of all prison homicides, despite making up less than 1% of the inmate population. But the Brotherhood doesn't stop at prison walls. By the 1980s and 1990s, their reach extends into suburban neighborhoods across California and beyond. Meth labs in desert trailers, smuggling operations in small towns, extortion rings that link the inside to the outside. Families in quiet suburbs may never know it, but the AB is pulling strings in their communities, often through local white street gangs acting as foot soldiers. For the Aryan Brotherhood, control of white inmates is non-negotiable. It is the foundation of their empire. If they cannot dominate white convicts behind bars, their reputation, and by extension, their criminal power on the outside, crumbles. And this is where the seeds of their conflict with the Russian Mafia are planted. Because unlike other white inmates, bikers, peckerwoods, or unaffiliated convicts, the Russians refuse to bow to the Brotherhood. They have their own hierarchy, their own code, and their own connections to outside money. To the AB, this is not just defiance. It is a challenge to their very identity. The Aryan Brotherhood operates on a simple formula: fear plus profit equals power. Anyone who disrupts that equation must be eliminated. Whether it's a rival gang in prison, a federal witness, or a Russian mobster setting up shop in the suburbs, the response is the same. Violence is not just a tool, it is the Brotherhood's language. From San Quentin to Pelican Bay, the Aryan Brotherhood has carved out its empire in blood. And when Russian mobsters began appearing in the suburbs of Los Angeles, it was only a matter of time before that same blood oath reached beyond the walls of prison cells. Because for the Aryan Brotherhood, the world is a prison yard, and only the strongest, most ruthless predators survive. The story of the Russian Mafia in Los Angeles begins thousands of miles away, in the collapse of an empire. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was crumbling. Borders opened. Black markets thrived. And from Moscow to Odessa, hardened criminals saw opportunity in chaos. These men were known as vori v zakone, thieves in law, a criminal brotherhood forged in the Soviet gulag system. They lived by a strict code: no cooperation with authorities, no legitimate work, and absolute loyalty to the underworld. When the Iron Curtain fell, some of these men, along with their families, immigrated to the United States. Many settled in Brooklyn's Brighton Beach, nicknamed Little Odessa. Others moved west to the sun-drenched suburbs of Los Angeles. Places like West Hollywood, Glendale, and Encino became hubs for the Russian-speaking underworld. Unlike street gangs that wore their colors openly, the Russian mob blended into suburbia. They drove Mercedes and BMWs. They lived in million-dollar homes. Their operations looked more like businesses than gangs: nightclubs, car dealerships, import-export firms. But beneath the facade, they ran some of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises America had ever seen. Their specialties were fraud and money laundering. Russian crews exploited medical billing scams, staged car accidents, and manipulated the stock market. They orchestrated multi-million-dollar schemes with a level of sophistication that baffled law enforcement. But they weren't limited to paper crimes. They trafficked heroin from Central Asia, smuggled weapons, and engaged in extortion and contract killings. By the 1990s, federal agents estimated that Russian organized crime had funneled billions of dollars through Los Angeles. Some of the money flowed back to Russia. Some was reinvested into real estate and businesses in California. But while the Russians thrived in high-level fraud, they also had to dip into street-level markets to maintain influence. Nightclubs became drug distribution hubs. Auto theft rings chopped luxury cars for parts. Protection rackets targeted small businesses within Russian immigrant communities. And here, they collided with the Aryan Brotherhood. For decades, methamphetamine had been the Brotherhood's bread and butter in Southern California. AB associates controlled distribution networks in suburbs like Orange County, the Inland Empire, and the San Fernando Valley. But the Russians were moving in, using their own connections to flood suburbs with heroin and cocaine. To the casual observer, Los Angeles in the 1990s looked peaceful. Crime rates were dropping from their crack-era peak. But beneath the surface, Russian mobsters were negotiating with cartel connections, bribing officials, and laundering money through suburban banks. At the same time, Aryan Brotherhood enforcers were tightening their grip on local white gangs, using them to cook meth, collect debts, and carry out hits. The suburbs had become contested territory. Law enforcement began noticing a pattern. Russian mobsters who pushed too far into Brotherhood territory started turning up dead. Sometimes it was a drive-by shooting on a quiet street in Sherman Oaks. Other times, it was an execution-style killing in a luxury vehicle parked outside a nightclub. One infamous case involved a Russian associate who had refused to pay a tax to distribute meth in the valley. Days later, his body was found with multiple stab wounds, an unmistakable Brotherhood signature. For the Russians, it was a shocking reminder that suburban wealth didn't shield them from prison politics. For the Aryan Brotherhood, it was simply business. But there was another battleground, one even deadlier than the streets of Los Angeles. And it was here that the Brotherhood and the Russians clashed most fiercely, inside California's prisons. The first clashes between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Russian Mafia in Los Angeles weren't headline-making wars. They started small, quiet disputes over money, drugs, and respect. But in the criminal underworld, small disputes have a way of turning lethal. For the Aryan Brotherhood, methamphetamine was more than just a drug. It was the backbone of their empire. In the 1980s and 90s, suburban meth labs sprang up in trailers, garages, and desert shacks across Southern California. Aryan Brotherhood associates controlled production, while street-level white gangs distributed it. The profits fueled prison operations, paid for lawyers, and funded the Brotherhood's violent enforcement machine. The Russians, however, brought with them a different portfolio. They had access to heroin pipelines from Central Asia. They moved cocaine through international contacts, and they weren't afraid to step into meth markets if the profits were high enough. By the mid-1990s, law enforcement reports indicated that Russian crews were muscling into meth distribution in the San Fernando Valley, territory the Aryan Brotherhood considered sacred ground. One early flashpoint came when a Russian crew set up shop in a Glendale nightclub. The club became a front for drug sales, gambling, and money laundering. But investigators later discovered that Aryan Brotherhood associates had already been pushing meth through the same nightlife circuit. Suddenly, two predators were feeding on the same prey. At first, the disputes were handled through intimidation. Brotherhood enforcers sent word. The Russians would have to pay taxes to operate. For other gangs, smaller white crews, bikers, or even independent dealers, such demands were routine. You either paid tribute to the AB or you risked a blade to the ribs. But the Russians were different. Backed by international money and their own brutal code, they refused to bow. To the Aryan Brotherhood, this wasn't just defiance, it was humiliation. Soon after, the first bodies started turning up. A Russian associate shot outside his luxury SUV in Sherman Oaks. Another beaten to death in a San Fernando Valley warehouse. The killings bore the hallmarks of Aryan Brotherhood enforcement, ruthless, efficient, and designed to send a message. On the other side, Russians were no strangers to violence themselves. In West Hollywood, a Brotherhood associate connected to a meth ring was found executed, suspected retaliation from a Russian crew. But while the Russians were deadly, they lacked the same stranglehold inside the prison system. That imbalance meant the Brotherhood had the upper hand whenever Russian members were locked up. And make no mistake, every crime on the street eventually had consequences behind bars. Drug cases, fraud charges, weapons busts. Many Russian mobsters inevitably found themselves in county jails or state prisons. And once inside, they entered a world ruled by the Aryan Brotherhood. That dynamic, street conflicts spilling into prison yards, would drive the rivalry into darker, bloodier territory. For the Brotherhood, the logic was simple. Any Russian crew that tried to claim Los Angeles suburbs without paying respect would be crushed. For the Russians, the suburbs represented opportunity and freedom, a chance to build wealth far from Moscow's watchful eye. But between opportunity and survival stood the Aryan Brotherhood, a gang that had thrived for decades by one rule above all others: kill whoever challenges you. The collisions were no longer isolated. They were becoming a war. In Los Angeles, the battle between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Russian mob was fought in nightclubs, strip malls, and suburban homes. But the real war, the war that mattered, was fought behind bars. Because in California, every street soldier eventually ends up in a cell. And inside those walls, the Aryan Brotherhood reigns supreme. From San Quentin to Folsom to Pelican Bay, the Brotherhood carved its empire through terror. White inmates had only two choices: align with the AB or risk annihilation. Bikers, Peckerwoods, independent hustlers, all were forced to submit. The Brotherhood's control wasn't just about ideology. It was about economics. Every drug deal, every debt, every protection racket inside prison flowed upward to the AB shot callers. But when Russian mobsters began entering California's prisons in larger numbers during the 1990s, the Brotherhood faced something new: men who didn't fear them. The Russians brought with them the traditions of the vori v zakone, the thieves-in-law. Their tattoos told their life story, just as AB Inc. did. A star on the shoulders, a cathedral on the chest, a cross on the fingers. Each mark was a badge of rank, earned through blood. And much like the Brotherhood, their code demanded silence, loyalty, and defiance against authority. In prison yards, these worlds collided. The Brotherhood expected Russian inmates to fall in line like any other whites. But the Russians refused. They had their own chain of command, their own money flowing in from the outside. They didn't need protection, and they wouldn't pay taxes. To the Aryan Brotherhood, this was more than disobedience. It was an existential threat. Their power depended on unquestioned obedience from every white inmate. If Russians could defy them and survive, it would inspire others to resist. And so, violence became inevitable. Accounts from former inmates and investigators describe brutal clashes. Russians jumped in cells, stabbed in showers, ambushed on the yard. The Brotherhood would send a torpedo, a soldier armed with a handmade knife, to make the point. Even in solitary, AB leaders issued kill orders through kites, coded messages, or lawyers acting as go-betweens. But the Russians didn't fold. Some fought back with equal ferocity, wielding improvised weapons of their own. They carried themselves with a confidence the AB wasn't used to seeing in other whites. For Brotherhood leaders, that defiance was intolerable. The prison wars soon spilled outward. When Russian mobsters resisted the AB inside, Brotherhood associates on the streets targeted their families and businesses. Home invasions in Encino, car bombings in Glendale, beatings outside nightclubs in Hollywood. The message was simple. What happens inside doesn't stay inside. And yet, despite the killings, the Russians remained a thorn in the Brotherhood side. With their vast financial resources, they could afford to support their men inside prison, paying for lawyers, commissary, and even protection through alliances. They weren't like broke street hustlers who crumbled under pressure. For law enforcement, these prison yard struggles were a nightmare. Every stabbing inside Pelican Bay meant another shooting in Sherman Oaks. Every dead Russian on the yard meant another body in a suburban driveway. The cycle fed itself, and the line between prison politics and suburban crime blurred until it was invisible. For the Aryan Brotherhood, it was a matter of principle. No white inmate could exist outside their control. For the Russians, it was a matter of pride. No foreign gang could dictate the rules of their brotherhood. And so, cell by cell, yard by yard, the foundation for bloodshed in Los Angeles suburbs was laid. Los Angeles suburbs. To most, they're symbols of safety: tree-lined streets, backyard pools, children riding bicycles under the warm California sun. But for a handful of residents in the 1990s and early 2000s, the suburbs became a battlefield. Because when the Aryan Brotherhood targeted the Russian mob, the murders didn't happen in back alleys or dark prison corners. They happened in the very neighborhoods families called home. One of the earliest high-profile killings linked to this underground war occurred in Sherman Oaks. A mid-level Russian associate was found slumped behind the wheel of his luxury SUV, engine still running. He'd been shot multiple times in the head and chest at close range. Investigators whispered that the hit was punishment for refusing to pay an Aryan tax on meth sales in the San Fernando Valley. To outsiders, it looked like a gangland slaying. To insiders, it was a declaration of war. The Aryan Brotherhood has always favored signature methods of killing: stabbings inside prison, often with homemade knives, precision shootings outside. Sometimes victims were mutilated, not just killed but displayed, to send a message. In several suburban cases, bodies were left in plain view, as if the killers wanted everyone to know who was responsible. Another notorious case surfaced in Glendale. A Russian mobster was ambushed in his own driveway, stabbed repeatedly with military precision. Detectives noted the wounds matched Brotherhood patterns seen in prison hits. Multiple thrusts to the chest and abdomen designed to collapse lungs and sever arteries. Neighbors were horrified. To them, it seemed like an inexplicable explosion of violence in their quiet community. But it was a Brotherhood contract killing carried out to maintain dominance over the drug trade. Home invasions became another weapon of war. AB associates stormed Russian-owned homes in Encino, masked and armed, not only to steal cash but to humiliate their rivals. Victims were beaten in front of their families. In some cases, the attacks ended in execution-style killings, cold, calculated, and devastatingly public. For the Brotherhood, these weren't just robberies. They were psychological warfare designed to spread fear through Russian networks and remind them that no place was safe, not even their million-dollar homes. But the Russians weren't defenseless. They struck back with equal brutality. In West Hollywood, a known Aryan Brotherhood associate was gunned down outside a nightclub tied to Russian operations. Witnesses described the scene as professional: a silenced pistol, a quick getaway, no words exchanged. Investigators believed it was retaliation for a Brotherhood hit days earlier. For every body left in a driveway in the valley, another body hit the pavement near Hollywood nightlife. Still, the Brotherhood's prison pipeline gave them the upper hand. Many of the suburban murders were traced back to orders issued from behind bars. Leaders serving life sentences, or even death row, were still able to command hits through coded letters, smuggled notes, or messages relayed by lawyers. These killings weren't random acts of street violence. They were organized, sanctioned, and executed with military efficiency. Law enforcement struggled to connect the dots. Each murder seemed isolated, a body in Sherman Oaks, another in Glendale, a third in Encino. But taken together, they painted a chilling picture, an invisible war being fought across Los Angeles suburbs. And for families living just a few houses away, the truth was unthinkable, that their quiet neighborhoods were doubling as the front lines of a criminal conflict imported from prisons and the post-Soviet underworld. The suburbs had become killing fields, and the bodies were piling up. As bodies began appearing across the Los Angeles suburbs, law enforcement found itself chasing shadows. A Russian associate executed in Sherman Oaks, an Aryan Brotherhood soldier shot outside a West Hollywood nightclub, a home invasion in Encino that ended with a father dead and a family traumatized. On the surface, these were isolated crimes, but investigators began to suspect they were all pieces of a larger puzzle, a war being waged between two of the deadliest organizations in America. For the Los Angeles Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, the problem was scale. Street gangs, cartels, and organized crime groups were already stretching resources thin. The Russian Mafia operated quietly, laundering millions through suburban businesses. The Aryan Brotherhood operated from prison cells, their enforcers moving in silence across neighborhoods. Proving a connection between a suburban murder and a prison order was like proving smoke without finding fire. By the late 1990s, the FBI took notice. Task forces were formed, bringing together federal agents, LAPD detectives, and even the IRS to trace financial crimes. One operation, codenamed Operation Odessa Sunset, focused on Russian mobsters running elaborate medical fraud schemes while secretly backing drug distribution networks in the valley. Wiretaps revealed coded conversations, snippets about collecting debts, cleaning house, and handling brothers. But rarely was anything explicit enough to stand up in court. When it came to the Aryan Brotherhood, infiltration was nearly impossible. Members spoke in codes, used tattoos as identifiers, and communicated through kites, tiny notes smuggled inside prison walls. Informants were rare, and when they did exist, their life expectancy was measured in weeks. Even federal prosecutors admitted that bringing a case against the Brotherhood was one of the hardest tasks in organized crime. The Russians posed a different challenge. They didn't operate like street gangs, where hierarchy could be mapped and leaders identified. Instead, they functioned as fluid networks. A crew running Medicare fraud in Glendale might also launder money for an arms deal, while another crew in West Hollywood handled heroin imports. The overlapping webs of business made it difficult to draw clear lines of command. And then there was the silence. Both organizations enforced loyalty through fear. In Russian immigrant communities, witnesses vanished or refused to testify. In prisons, snitches were stabbed or strangled before they could ever take the stand. Every investigation stalled on the same wall of silence. Despite these challenges, the task forces made some progress. In the early 2000s, several Russian mobsters were indicted on racketeering and fraud charges. Around the same time, federal prosecutors launched one of the largest cases against the Aryan Brotherhood in history, indicting dozens of members on murder, extortion, and conspiracy charges. But even as cases moved forward, the killings didn't stop. Prison orders continued to leak onto the streets. Russian money kept flowing through Los Angeles real estate. And families in suburban neighborhoods kept waking up to crime scene tape just blocks from their homes. For law enforcement, it was like fighting a ghost. Every time one cell was dismantled, another rose in its place. And with two organizations as ruthless as the Aryan Brotherhood and the Russian mob, one truth became clear. Prosecutions could slow the violence, but they could never stop it entirely.